Hello and welcome, I'm Tafara Gadamu. My guest today, the paleoanthropologist Dr. Yohannes Haile Selassie, and his team of researchers have made an important discovery from an ancient site in the Afar region of Ethiopia. This fairly complete 3.8 million year old cranium, my guest says, demonstrates that linear transition is no longer the case. In other words, the species that the cranium belongs to, Australopithecus anamensis, and Lucy's Australopithecus afarensis coexisted at least for 100,000 years. Well, this discovery, which was announced in the journal Nature yesterday, as much exciting as it is set to generate quite a debate. Everyone, welcome to the program again.
Well, thank you. Good to be here again.
So you're making this huge, and you just made this huge announcement the other day.
Yeah.
And you're talking about a cranium, and we are talking about a big thing.
Yes, it is a big thing. Two papers came out in Nature yesterday, and it actually had a tremendous media coverage, as you've seen. This is a cranium that we found from the Waranzo Mille site in the Afar region of Ethiopia. And
that you've been working on?
Yes, I've been working there for the last 15 years, yeah. And this specimen was found in 2016, and it's been almost 3 years. A little more than 3 years. And we've been working on this specimen for the last years, comparing it with specimens and so forth to figure out what it is. But one of the things that's really interesting about this specimen is this is the first complete cranium ever found in the fossil record from sediments that are older than 3 million years, or even 2.5 million years.
And to be more specific about your species anamensis.
This is, we assigned it to Australopithecus anamensis, and which is another interesting point because being 3.8 million years old and the fact that what we have known about Australopithecus anamensis so far was limited to between 4.2 and 3.9. This new discovery extends the time range to about 3.8, at least by 100,000 years. So what that means is not only did we extend the species' lifespan, like how long it lived in the geological time, but we also see that there might be like an overlap with its descendant species, Lucy's species Australopithecus afarensis. Now, this is a very interesting point because in the past, we didn't have any fossils from the time between 3.6 million years and 3.9. And the hypothesis that we all agreed on was that Australopithecus anamensis is the ancestor of Lucy's species Australopithecus afarensis. And the mode of their transition, we thought, was linear. In other words, the ancestor goes extinct when
the other one chips in, moves in.
Yeah, exactly. So that's how we thought. But this new discovery, being 3.8, helped us figure out there was one specimen from about 3.9 million years ago. It's like a frontal fragment, which was...
The one discovered in 1981?
1981, yeah. This was found by the Middle-Ash Project in 1981, and it's been a subject of great study because given its antiquity, researchers, including... Dr. Burhani Asfa, who wrote his PhD on that specimen, tried to figure out what species it belonged to. Because in 1981, we don't have Australopithecus anamensis. It was not known at that time. The earliest human ancestor that we had at that time was Australopithecus afarensis. So the conclusion was that it's probably Australopithecus afarensis since we don't have anything. But after the discovery of Australopithecus anamensis, people started saying, well, could it be anamensis? Because it's old, it's 3.9, and it falls within the time range of Australopithecus anamensis. And then further work in southern Ethiopia at a place called Fejej, they recovered some teeth that are about 4 million years old.
And what do you make out of that?
Well, exactly. So do you make it Australopithecus afarensis or do you make it Australopithecus anamensis? That was the key question. So initially, the people who found those specimens said maybe this is like afarensis. And then recent publication by one of our colleagues said that they're probably Australopithecus anamensis, right? If they are anamensis at 4 million years, well, that's okay. You don't see any overlap. But then our research with the discovery of the new cranium shows that maybe the Fejej specimens could also be Australopithecus afarensis. Some of the teeth actually look like afarensis than they look like.
At well over 4.4? 4 million?
Yes. So if they are indeed Australopithecus afarensis, what that means is the overlap is even more. It would be like 200,000 years. But for now, what we have conducted as part of our analysis is to look at this frontal from Bolodli, from the Middle Awash, and see if it is afarensis or anamensis. Now, anamensis has, based on our knowledge from this new discovery, it has a very narrow area behind the eye orbits, and that's like a primitive feature that you see in the earlier forms. So as our brain got larger, the area behind the orbits get wider. So the constriction, as we call it, gets like wider and wider. So what we see in the Bolodli frontal from the 3.9 million years old is it's more like what we have from Hadar at 3.2 than it is like the new cranium. So that is what convinced us that this is actually afarensis and not Australopithecus anamensis. Now, in our research, this part, the post-orbital constriction, is really a key character in terms of taxonomy, like what species it belonged to. So we're convinced that this specimen from 3.9 from the Middle Awash is actually Australopithecus afarensis because it looks a lot more like the much younger Australopithecus afarensis specimens from Hadar that it
doesn't have much ancient features, is that what you said?
It doesn't have that. Yeah, it has derived features like Australopithecus afarensis. So that is clearly a convincing morphological feature, which allowed us to put it into Australopithecus afarensis and talk about the overlap in time. So in terms of the mode of evolution, as I said, we have this linear transition from Australopithecus anamensis to Australopithecus afarensis. But with the discovery of this new cranium, it was not linear. The parent species and the daughter species, they overlapped in time. Now, you may wonder how did that happen? So usually not only in our evolution, but in the evolutionary history of a lot of animals, major populations, live in certain areas. And sometimes a small group of that population could actually isolate itself from the main population and undergo changes to adapt to the environment that it's living in. So those changes accumulate through time to make it different from the parent population. This is what we call allopatric speciation. Okay, so sometimes there is sympatric speciation where a species could actually evolve within the population without isolating itself from.
How far isolated need they to be to get to evolve on that line?
Yeah, the isolation doesn't have to be in terms of distance. Let's say these are living in an area which is tectonically active, so there is a lot of rifting. And one eruption could separate two populations into two areas, and the habitat, the environment is going to be different. So they're going to have to adapt to the environment where they're in the area. So those changes force extinction and evolution.
So have you established that as yet?
Not yet. That's the hypothesis. But
what clues do we have now?
What clues we have? Well, the fact that we have anamensis living at the same time with afarensis, there must have been a separation. That's the only way that they may have evolved into a species different from where they started from. So that speciation event is not unique to humans or to our lineage. It has happened to a lot of in a lot of animals. So this is something that characterizes us as no different from other animals. We evolved in the same way. So we can't see ourselves as special.
Yeah, but you need to corroborate that with some evidence,
yes,
which you don't have as yet.
Well, we do have some geological evidence because the second paper was on the geology, like determining the age and the environment. And what we're seeing is that this species, Australopithecus anamensis in Woranzomille, was living in a sort of lake environment with rivers pouring into the lake, with trees and open grasslands away from the trees. So there is a habitat specifically where this species was living at Woranzomille. But Australopithecus anamensis is also known from Kenya and from Middle Awash in Asaisi, and the environments we're sampling are different. They're not exactly the same. So what that tells you is as animals, they have to adapt to the environment in which they're living, right? So that's one evidence that population could be different. Even if it's the same species, two populations living in different places could live in different habitats, right? But if the habitat is really different, then they have to adapt to that environment, and that's how they evolve into something else.
It's been nearly 100 years since discoveries when fossil evidence was made available, were discovered for the genus Australopithecus, right?
Yes.
And most of the others species, including Lucy's species, Australopithecus afarensis, we have much fossil evidence for that, which is represented by Lucy, the Dikiko child, and so on.
Yeah.
And also for the Garhi and the others. Not so for the Anamensis part of that genus, right?
Yeah.
And yours is quite an addition, an important one. But with limited fossil evidence, you're trying to make a major departure in terms of giving sense to human evolution.
Yeah,
there is so much in between that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of our limitations in our field. We don't have enough fossils as much as we want in the fossil record. So we have to live with what we have, but extract as much data as we can from what we're finding. Now, speaking of Australopithecus anamensis, since its naming in 1995, there has been mostly isolated teeth, jaw fragments from upper, lower, and we never had any clue in terms of what the face looked like, what the shape of the head was. And this specimen is really critical because it shows us for the first time what Australopithecus afarensis looked like. Now, we have a flesh reconstruction, which you might have seen, and that shows you how similar it was to Lucy's species, Australopithecus afarensis, but in some ways departs from it, particularly in the mid-facial area. So every time we talk about a species, we base our knowledge based on what we're recovering from the fossil record. And this is yet another discovery which gives us a lot more information about that species. Now, if people go out and find more of this specimen, more of the species, particularly in terms of elements below the neck, now we will have a chance to talk about how tall the individuals of Australopithecus anamensis were, how big they were, like their body weight and so forth. So it all depends on what we're finding from the fossil record.
Which you're going to do you're going to undertake some more excavation.
Oh yeah.
There. This was surface collection, right?
This was on the surface. This is so the first piece was actually found by a local guy who was not even working with us. He was living in this up higher ground area in the Afar, within our study area, because the Afars usually when it rains, the lower areas get flooded. So they move their herd to higher ground, and this guy happened to be there, and he's been living there for almost 3 months, and the specimen he found was serendipitous actually, because he was digging a big hole for his newborn goats, because he wants to put them in there and then put a thorn around it so that jackals or hyenas don't get them. And that's when he saw that specimen, and he's been asking us to be hired to work with us, and we said, well, we have enough workers. So he's been trying hard to find something to impress us so that he can be hired. Well, he was lucky. He found this one, and he came to where I was working, and he showed it to me, and we went back to the site because I had to ask him, where did you find it? Exactly how did you see it? So he took me, and there was an imprint on the ground from where he picked it up. So I told him to put it back as it was, and he did. And I started, looking around, and I turned around, and the rest of the head was sitting there 3 meters away from it. And these were on the surface. But next to the big head that we found, there is this huge mound of goat poop, right? Because the goats were living there for 3 months. In our field, especially when you find specimens like this, you don't run away. You have to look for more, because I can see that there were missing parts of the orbit.
Another flash flood, and all the evidence would be gone.
It would be gone. So usually we had to surface scrape some area around the main discovery, and within that area that we bounded, the whole goat mound, goat poop mound was inside it. So we had no choice but sift it through. But that was a very interesting process. But interesting, Lev, we found the key pieces from the orbit under
I just want you to visualize for me because you're using the reconstructed material.
Yeah, so the orbit from both sides was missing, like starting from about mid-orbit area, and we didn't have the cheek. So those were recovered from the sieving. So that was a payoff for us for sifting goat poop, but that's what we do. And that element actually helped us to reconstruct the whole face, because what we did is we exported it to the United States for micro CT scanning. We CT scanned it, and we were able to mirror image the missing parts from one side to the other. And now we have a complete face, which we based to do the flesh.
Based on what you have, you kind of created that face.
Yeah.
And how percentage-wise, how complete is it?
It is, I would say, about 95% complete, because all we're missing was just the orbit from this side, from one side. So the whole head is like the base is intact, the face is intact. Everything is as is, except for the orbit and the little cheekbone from one side. So because we found it on the other side, we were able to easily mirror image it to the other side, because our face, like our body, is symmetrical. Left and right are almost, mirror images. So that was an easy process.
This is hypothetical, but did you expect to recover the rest of the body?
Well,
is that a possibility?
We're going back. We're going back because this specimen, there is clear evidence that it came out of the sandstone horizon where we found the specimens. So erosion is actually what brought it out. It takes very long time to actually erode the sandstone because it's so hard. So what we're trying to do is, if this is intact, which means it's not transported for a long distance, it must have died and got buried and fossilized very close. So there is a possibility that the whole skeleton could be in those sandstones. So this is not something that we can run away from. We have to spend our time and energy to actually go through the sandstone, excavate the sandstone, and see if there is any remaining part of that individual.
You keep an eye. You don't. This is not to say that you keep an eye all year round, because you come for 6 to 8 weeks every year.
Yes.
But in between, anything could happen.
Yeah, but the good thing about this site, this locality, is it's a sandstone, so it doesn't erode really quickly. If you have soft sediments like what we have at Harar, where erosion is really quick, one rain could actually wipe out a lot of things from the slopes. But this one, unless we actually excavate it with tools, it's not going to be eroded really easily. So that's my hope, that nothing will be missing, except for probably pieces that has already been eroded away. Those we're not going to be able to find. But whatever is in the sandstones, we should be able to recover if there is any. And that's something that we're going to have to do in the near future.
This guy lived and died 3.8 million years ago. That you claim to have established based on what you have, the evidence. Mm-hmm. Now, and you've also determined that he is an adult.
Yes.
And he is a he.
He is a he. Yeah.
Also an adult.
Yeah.
How do you reach that conclusion with what you have?
Let me start by why is it a male? Why is it a he? Now, if you look at gorillas, for example, or chimpanzees, most males don't even have a sagittal crest, but there is a difference in the shape of the head between males and females, and what characterizes those ancient apes also characterized our earlier ancestors. So the males usually develop a crest at the center of their head because of the muscles that attach on the side. There are two temporal lines which merge and create a crest in the middle. And this guy has a crest. The females don't have a crest. They don't develop the crest. So that's one. Secondly, males also have larger canine compared to females. And this individual had one of the largest canines ever documented in the fossil record. It's comparable to what we've seen in Ardipithecus ramidus at 4.4 and also Sahelanthropus chadensis way back in time, about 6.5 million years ago. So those characters are what helped us determine that this was actually a male. So it's a morphology-based determination. The second thing is adult. In fact, we said it's an old adult because this guy has worn his teeth all the way down to the roots. And that indicates that this individual has used his teeth for a long time. So the combination.
How long would that be able to?
Well, that's the problem. For example, in modern humans, we usually can tell the range of how old a person is by looking at the wear and of the teeth. But even in that case, there are differences between populations depending on what you're eating, because some populations eat diet that abrades the teeth really quickly. Others eat soft things and they don't abrade really quickly. So even within modern populations, there will be a difference. But on average, we can tell based on the development of the teeth and the wear pattern on the teeth, like how old. Like we can give a range of like plus or minus 5 years. But for these individuals, not only don't we know what they were eating, at least for now, because in the future we're going to do more analysis, particularly on the teeth, and see like the carbon content of the teeth and see if we can determine whether they were eating more grassy food or fruits and so forth. This is something that we can tell by sampling the teeth. But for now, with this individual, we don't really know. We can't say how old he was, but other than saying he was really an old individual.
So have you recovered fossil fragments from another individual, it looks like, or it's just only for this?
Not from the same locality, but we have had lots of fossils from other localities that are dated to between 3.6 and 3.8. And those we've been trying to compare them with both Anamensis and Afarensis. Some of them...
That would be the transitional
period. That's how we thought about it. As a matter of fact, I've argued that what we're sampling from 3.6 to 3.8 are similar to both groups. So why are we distinguishing them as like different species? Why can't we put them all into one lineage? That was my argument. But now with this discovery, I'm convinced that Anamensis and Afarensis are different. They have their own morphological features. What that means is now we have to critically look at the fossils that we have from 3.6 to 3.8. And in fact, there are some specimens that are more like Anamensis, close to about 3.76, which is close to 3.8. Those might actually be Australopithecus anamensis. So we're going to have to reconsider our descriptions and analyses of those specimens and see if they are actually Anamensis instead of Australopithecus afarensis.
Well, it's not going to be a quite year, if you will, or quite a few months. There will be counter-arguments coming. Do you expect some? And what would those counter-arguments be or look like?
Well, I mean, starting today, I'm going to go through the internet and see what people have said about these two papers and our conclusions about the mode of evolution and also the description of the specimen. So we should be able to actually learn something from this scientific dialogues because a lot of questions come from those kinds of discussions and critics, and that actually improves the way we understand our evolutionary history than just us saying, this is what we have, this is what we think. And other ideas come in, you combine those ideas and know more about our evolutionary history. People can bring like questions that we haven't thought about, right? And that's what we're looking for in those critics that we're going to probably see in the next few days.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yohannes Haile Selassie. It was a pleasure having you again on my show.
Well, thanks for having me here.